Okay, this is the meeting. This is a video that explains how to calculate per unit contribution margin and total contribution margin. The first thing I suggest you do is go to the course module page and download the documents related to this video. They should be right under where you accessed the video. Now we're going to start uh, the lecture. So on the page right now, go to the variable and fixed cost behavioral demonstration, the document you see on your screen. What this document shows is the behaviors of both variable cost and fixed cost. The first thing you should notice is that variable cost, which is on the top, stays the same regardless of production. If you want more about that, that's in note 1, explained in note 1. Variable costs are any costs that go into production. So if I want to produce 1 unit, I need a certain amount of materials and labor. If I want to produce 100th unit, I need that same materials and labor. So the costs are going to stay the same regardless of production. That means that total variable costs will change. So if I produce 10 units and it costs me $5 per unit to make, it's going to cost me a total variable cost of $50. That would be described in note 2. If I if I produce 50 units times $5 per unit, it's going to cost me $250. If I make 100 units at $5 a unit, it's going to cost me $500. If I make 500 units at $5 a unit, it's going to cost me a total variable cost of $2,500. And if I make 1,000 units at $5 a unit variable cost, it'll cost me total variable cost of $5,000. Now, fixed cost works the exact opposite. Fixed cost total stays the same. It's always $10,000, but the per unit cost changes with production. So $10,000 divided by 10 units, each unit has to take up $1,000 in fixed cost. If I make 50 units at $10,000 fixed cost, each unit has to eat up take over to compensate for $200. If I make 100 units with a total cost of $10,000 fixed cost, each unit $100. So this is explained in note 3 and note 4. Let's go to the demonstration. Demonstration 1. So demonstration 1, it says, and it says very simple per unit and total contribution margin problem. Okay, so this is the most basic information I will be giving you, the easiest information that you're going to get. You probably will not see this on a test or anything this way. I'm going to make it more difficult, but this is just to get you started. So what I have here is a list of costs: direct materials per unit, direct labor per unit, manufacturing overhead per unit, manufacturer overhead fixed per unit, and selling price per unit. First thing you need to know is that direct materials is always variable. So I put the word variable next to it, always variable. Direct labor is also always variable. Now, the hard part is figuring out which costs, manufacturing overhead costs, are fixed and which manufacturing costs are variable. Overhead costs are variable. In this case, I give it to you. Manufacturing overhead variables, $2 per unit, and I give you $40,000 worth of total fixed cost, and I give you a selling price of $15. Okay, calculate the step one is calculate the per unit variable cost. So all you're doing is adding up those all the variable costs, and that's your variable cost per unit. Step two is calculate your contribution margin per unit. Your contribution margin is the difference between your selling price, per unit selling price, and your variable cost per unit. So we already established that the variable cost per unit is $10. We know that the selling price is $15, so we're going to subtract 15 from 10. So your contribution margin per unit would be $5. Total contribution margin, step one is the same. So I'm going to just copy that down. Step two is the same. So I'm going to copy that down. Step three is calculate total contribution margin. Total contribution margin is contribution margin per unit times number of units sold. So in this case, our contribution margin per unit equals $5, and our units sold is 30,000 units. So it's $5 times 30,000 units equals $150,000 worth of total contribution margin. C, we're going to calculate another problem. Again, step one stays the same, so I'm going to copy that down. Step two stays the same, so I'm going to copy it down. Step three, the only changes is the number of units. Because we sold a different amount of number of units this time, the number of units change. This time, we sold 20,000 units. So now the units are going to be 20,000, and the calculation is going to be 5 times 20,000, or $100,000. One more example. Again, step one stays the same. Step two stays the same. Step 3 is the same except for the number of units. The number of units changes. So now the number of units is 40,000 units. So $5 per unit times 40,000 units is $200,000. Okay, now we're going to do a more complex one for per unit contribution margin. This is a more normal type of problem you're going to get in this class. So in this case, you have Flint Manufacturing Company, and it makes a statement saying that it produces automobile industry. The table below shows the average cost per unit when the company produces 10,000 units. You need to stop right there. So what that means is that these are the average cost per unit when you make 10,000 units. Now, why is that important? Because the fixed cost, remember the fixed cost, the average per unit cost changes as the number of unit changes. So here's how it looks. So production employee salary, as we said, is a variable cost. So it won't change. It's always going to be $3.20. However, production supervisor's salary is going to be a fixed cost. So if it costs $5 a unit, when we make 10,000 units, the total fixed cost of production supervisor's salary is $50,000. Material A is a variable cost, so we don't care. Material B is a variable cost, so we don't care. Material C is also a variable cost because it changes with production. If it didn't change with production, it would be a fixed cost. But in this case, I indicated to you that it was a variable cost. That factory rent is $100,000, 10,000 units times $10 a piece. Factory general manager's salary is 10,000 units times $8, so the total is $80,000. Warehouse employee salary is $5 per unit when we make 10,000 units. So that means that total warehouse salaries is $50,000. Factory administrative salaries are $2.80 per unit when we make 10,000 units. So factory warehouse salary or administrative salaries is $20,800. Utilities is $1.20 when we make 10,000 units. So it's $10,200. And factory machine is $1 when we make 10,000 units. So it's 10,000. Remember, fixed costs do not change, total fixed costs do not change. So we can calculate the total based on the per unit of fixed cost given. Okay, so let's demonstrate how to calculate unit contribution margin. Unit contribution margin, first step is identify the variable cost. What I did here is what this is showing is simply a copy of the table from above. What I do then is I go through, so on a test, what I would do is make another column and put V for variable and F for fixed. I would do that immediately when you get a test question like this or any question like this. The second part is take all the variable costs, list them, and add them up. So these are all the variable costs. It equals $9.20. Step 3 is simply subtract the variable cost per unit from the selling price. The selling price given to you was $20 per unit. So you would subtract 20 from 9 to get 1080, and that's your contribution margin per unit. This would mean that every unit that Flint Manufacturing makes, they make $10.80 that goes towards covering fixed cost and profit. The third demonstration is calculate total contribution margin. Again, we have the same information. Step one is the same as when we did per unit contribution margin. We identify the variable costs. Step two is add up the variable costs. Step three is to subtract the variable cost from the selling price. So those first three steps are the same. Step four is calculate total contribution margin. What you would do is you multiply the contribution margin per unit by the number of units sold. So based on this information, there's 10,000 units sold. So you'd multiply $10.80 per unit times 10,000 units. That's all I have for today. Have a great day.